Hey there, have no fear, my fellow Jeep victims. Doc is here, and you're about to get your weekly or monthly dose of Cherokee therapy to soothe all those rough spots you get from dealing with that Chrysler. Look, we all love lifted Jeeps, right? They look really, really tough. Hell, a lot of us lift the hell out of our rigs even though we have no intent to take them off road because there's nothing wrong with making your Jeep look exactly the way you want. I may laugh at you, especially if you've got those stupid eyelashes over your Jeep Wrangler headlights, but hey, that's just me. If you're going to lift your rig yourself, there are a few things you need to know about angles and geometry. Now, I know. We all thought geometry was behind us as soon as we finished high school. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but geometry is back with a vengeance, because if you don't handle a few important angles, well, you could wind up chewing up the U-joints on your drive shaft sooner than you wanted, or maybe even worse. So, what angles am I talking about? Now, this is a nifty drawing from Tom Wood's drive shafts explaining everything you need to know about the front and rear driveline angles. I put the link to this article below so you can find it. We aren't going to talk about front angles. This video just deals with the rear ones and how to dial them in using axle shims. So, to be perfectly clear, even though I'm wasting my time here and I'll still get angry comments in the comment section explaining how I don't know what I'm doing, this video is about rear driveline angles for four-wheel drives without a slip yoke at the transfer case. I'm using a 2000 Jeep Cherokee as the example. It has a 33-inch Adams drive shaft and a G2 axles slip yoke eliminator, something like this picture here. If you've got a setup like that, then these are the angles you are going to care about. First, you need a drive shaft with a double cardan joint that bolts to the transfer case output yoke. What's a double cardan joint? A double cardan joint is just a setup where on one end, instead of one U-joint, you have two U-joints in this yoke thing, and that helps make the angle to the drive shaft a little more gentle. It spreads it across two U-joints instead of having only just one. Makes the angle less severe. From this diagram, you can see it. They call it a CV joint. Also from this diagram, it looks like the rear pinion should be pointed directly at your transfer case, right? No. No. Almost directly, but no. You've got to aim for about 2 degrees below the transfer case. Now, in my experience, is there some slop here? Yes. If you're pointed 3 degrees below the transfer case, it's probably not going to cause horrible binding and grinding at your drive shaft's rear U-joint. But that said, each Jeep is different. I've also found that sometimes I have to try different shim angles to really get it right. So I do the job multiple times. That's what you're seeing here, actually. But hey, that's the price we pay for that awesome lifted look. Am I right? Now, why do you have to point it below? Okay, for that we have Isaac Newton and his third law of motion to thank. And I know, first I bring back geometry, now I'm bringing back physics. I'm sorry. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. When you hit the gas, your tires spin to accelerate in this direction. Easy, right? We all get that. Well, remember the third law of motion. There's an opposite reaction, and that's what you see here. For a few moments, the axle and the pinion will want to pivot in the opposite direction, and you have to have, and that's upward, so you have to have the pinion pointed downward just a little bit. Otherwise, it's going to, when you accelerate, the pinion is going to point above the transfer case, and you're going to get that nasty grind. That's what I've been getting. So what I'm going to show you is how to fix this problem. In my Jeep XJ, I had a real issue installing aftermarket transmission mounts. There are none that are good, except for the really high-priced ones. All the ones I got were too short, so short that the exhaust rested on my crossmember, and they had the wrong angle. The actual transmission mount is supposed to slope downward toward the rear a little bit. So in my case, what it meant was that the transfer case was too low and pointed in the wrong direction, and the result was that I needed big shims. Way more than the 3 degrees that came with my 3-inch lift kit, which is way more. Mine was way more than the rule of thumb everyone tells you, 1 degree per inch of lift, man. Don't ask me why mine wound up that way. I failed geometry. But now I've fixed my transmission mount problem, and as soon as I did, my rear U-joint started grinding because now the pinion was pointed directly at my transfer case, maybe even a little above. So for the third time, I have to change out my shims, and I'll show you how I did it. This video is a little embarrassing because it turns out I forgot what degree shims I'd installed originally, but we'll get there. The point is that if you want to install shims, a lot of what you need to know is here, warts and all, including my mistakes. And if you need to change shims, all of what you need to know is here. First thing, get an angle grinder. I got this one off Amazon, but if you've got some extra cash, you can go for a more accurate one. And I hear there are even apps on your phone that do this. So get yourself an angle grinder and then measure your drive shaft angle like you see in this picture. Now, if you then take your drive shaft off, you can measure your pinion angle at the yoke like this. If you don't want to take your drive shaft off, you can also measure the pinion angle across your bolts on the diff cover, the rear diff cover, like this. Remember though, in both cases, measuring like this to get pinion angle off of the rear diff is going to give you wildly different angles from the drive shaft because you're going to be measuring almost vertically. So if you measure the pinion angle like that, you're going to have to do a little addition or subtraction to figure out the numbers you need. The details are all in that article from Tom Woods I linked, but just as a quick example, if your tool says 83 and you're measuring off the differential cover bolts, subtract 90, so you get 7. The rule of thumb is drive shafts are usually between 10 and 40, pinions should be between 0 and 30, so if your numbers are outside those ranges, you are doing it wrong. I highly recommend also that you have these tools: a breaker bar, the angle finder we just talked about, a socket wrench and sockets, in this case metric, and an electric impact socket helps. Next, go ahead and use your breaker bar or whatever to break free your lug nuts while the vehicle's on the ground. It's a lot easier to do it here before you jack it up because you've got the wheels providing resistance. And of course, you're going to need a jack stand or a jack of some kind. This is my hydraulic jack. Got it from Harbor Freight. Really pleased with it. Make sure you have jack stands. In this case, I suggest really sturdy ones. I'm using 12-ton jack stands, but you're going to need those. So here are your jack points, right? Make sure you're jacking and lifting and putting in jack stands at the proper places. Now, this is actually just an overview of what my setup looks like right now. You can see how the pinion angle, it's deceptive. From here, it looks like it might be pointing a little bit down, but it's actually not. And just wanted to show you my angle finder and where I'm measuring on the drive shaft. There's my drive shaft double cardan joint right up front into my slip yoke eliminator at the rear of the transfer case, that blue housing right there. And that's the yoke, that's the output yoke coming out of the transfer case. So it's really important. This is where the magic happens in terms of my grinding. It's directly pointed at the transfer case, and when I accelerate, that pinion goes right up and creates an awful angle that results in grinding that really, really annoys me. Here's what my existing shims looked like. They're pretty beefy, pretty thick there. You can see how my the perch is angled so that the pinion points more directly at the transfer case. And those are the whatever you call them, U-shackles, U-brackets that you bolt on to hold your leaf springs to the actual axle itself. So here I am starting to lift with my hydraulic jack. I put wood in there to protect the pumpkin. And basically what I'm doing here is lifting it up high enough to the point where I can put my jack stands against the frame and let the axle hang all the way down. So it's important here to have big enough jack stands to do that, and to have a hydraulic lift that can get you high enough. So adding a few extra boards actually helps get it higher. My jack stands are in place. Now I'm going to release the pressure off the hydraulic jack and let it lower gently onto the stands. Always want to do this gently so that you don't wind up dinging your unibody or bending it, God forbid. So I'm just going to really gently release the pressure, and you should see it start going down very slowly onto the jack stands. And there she is. This is where I love my electric impact. I'm having trouble here finding the actual lug nut and film at the same time, as you can see. But you're going to want to get that on the lug nut and just start spinning them all the way off so that you can remove the tire, and then you're going to set the tire aside. At this point, your rear axle is being held on by your leaf springs and your shocks, assuming you still have all of those on the rear of your Jeep, and you can make a choice here. The next step we're going to do is basically remove all the bolts holding your axle to the leaf springs, at which point only your shocks are going to be keeping it attached to the Jeep. So some people will put jack stands under there to catch the axle as it begins to lower. But keep in mind, we're going to have to, lower the axle to the point where it's separated enough from the leaf springs you can get the wedge out. So, you can go either way on this one. I actually let it hang from my shocks, but some people really want those rear, a second set of jack stands holding up the axle. You will need a second set of jack stands, smaller ones for this part. So I'm using 3 tons in my case. Definitely that means you're going to have a total of 4 jack stands for the job, regardless of whether you use the second pair for this step or not. And then once you have the tire off, you can access those nuts really easily at the top of your U-bolts. And what you're going to do is just loosen them one at a time. I try and do it evenly so that it just comes down more easily. And I'm not going to show you the video, but basically you just loosen all of those up. Okay, so once you've got all those nuts off on both sides, you're going to remove that rusted plate, keep the washers, keep the plate, you're going to need those. You're going to put the hydraulic jack under the pumpkin, and you're going to jack up just a bit so that the axle's weight is now on the jack. And then you're going to remove all your U-bolts and start to lower it very carefully. And what I want to do is make sure that as I lower the axle, I have 2 additional jack stands in place. And I'm looking right now at the brake line, the emergency brake line. I don't want to stretch that and snap it. So we're going to do this very carefully. We're going to make sure that the 2 jack stands that I have set up are at the proper height that they'll take the axle. And then I'll go ahead and start relieving the pressure. This is really hard to do with one hand. I don't have a really, really good camera setup. I apologize, but I'm releasing the pressure now and letting the axle fall, and I'm checking and I'm watching. And you can see on the right side, it's going to match perfectly with the jack stand, but on the left, oops, we got a problem. I stop it, and I have to push the jack stand a little bit forward to make sure it's going to catch the axle. So in this case, if it doesn't get caught by the jack stands, that's fine. It can hang down off the shocks. But if something goes wrong or whatever, I want those jack stands there to catch the axle, because even though it's not the whole car, it's just the axle. If that thing lands on your foot, your fingers, whatever, you're going to have a really, really bad day and have to spend some time in the hospital. But you can see now we've got enough clearance. We can start getting at those shims and doing our replacement job. All right, now we have to deal with the actual pin that goes through all the leaf springs and keeps them pressed together and holds the shim in place. And as you can see, this thing's rusted all to hell. This is a rough country lift kit. The springs came from we should call it rust country. That was brand new. And I'm a little bit surprised to see how much rust has gotten through the paint on those leaf springs and on the pin itself. I mean, that's really, really bad. So when I actually did this job, it was quite difficult to break it free. And then of course with these pins, the bottom is actually a rounded piece that I'll show you here in a second. So here we're looking underneath the shim, and you can see how that piece on the bottom is rounded. So once your pin begins to spin, it can be quite difficult to get something on that to keep it in place so you can actually remove the nut. Usually I use vice grips or something like that, but in this case, somebody has borrowed, quote unquote, my vice grips and not put them back where they belong. So I had to use those channel locks, and boy, was that fun. But eventually I got it off. And you can see as soon as you get it off, those leaf springs can come apart. Make sure you salvage or keep those little plastic washers there. They provide some cushioning, I think. And you don't want to lose those. You want to keep those if you can. And I'm just checking everything to make sure we're good to go for the next steps, and we are. So the next thing you're going to want to do is basically lift up that part right there and remove the actual shim. You've got it. You're at the shim, and you just pull it off. Get it out of the pin like I'm doing right here. And then you're all set to do all this stuff on the other side. I'm only showing you one side. Everything I'm showing you here, you have to do on the other side as well. Don't forget that. And there's my nice rusted pin and starting to rust shim. And here's the really embarrassing part. I thought that I had 10-degree shims installed. Those are 10 degrees would be really radical. And I got it in my head that that's what they were. So I think those are like, I can't remember what brand. I thought those were 10-degree, the black ones. It turns out, nope, they're 8-degree. So guess what I had bought online from Rock Iron 4-wheel drive or whatever they're called, off-road. I bought 8-degree shims. So it's useless for me to replace an 8-degree with an 8-degree. So I had to think quickly. And what I wound up doing is just taking the old 3-degree shims from the original rough country kit that I had installed. And I reused them, put them in. I have new pins, so I'm going to use new pins this time so they're not quite as rusty. I don't know if this is going to work. At this point, when I'm making this video, I had no idea if this was going to work, but it's all I could do because I couldn't wait. This is my daily driver. So already I put the shim on here, put the pin through it. Now I'm threading it back up through the holes in the leaf springs. Very difficult to do with one hand, so I'm probably going to put the phone down and do it. But you've got to get it through all those and through the top where you're going to refasten the nut and secure that thing down. And so here I've got it through finally, and there's my nice new nut. I'm going to put it on the nice new pin and start tightening it down. In this case, I'm definitely using the electric and just getting that thing as tight as I can. I couldn't find any torque specs for this. So after I finished with the electric, I'd get out my box end wrench and start finishing it off, just getting it good and tight. That's about the best you can do here. You just want it tight enough that it's going to hold all the leaf springs together and keep it all secure. So here, I'm at the stage now. Both sides have been done. I've put in the 3-degree shims, and I'm ready to start jacking the axle back up. But you notice that hole in the middle of the perch there? That hole has to line up, the round hole has to line up with that round part of the pin underneath the shim that I'm pointing to right there and can't quite get a camera angle on. That has to go in that round hole because that's how the rear axle gets aligned in the proper orientation. So what you have to do is what I'm going to start doing next. You have to get a pry bar, right? And you're going to use the pry bar to move the axle back and forth. Sometimes, a lot of times you don't need the pry bar actually. You can just use your hands as you jack it up. I jack it up slowly and then I start just shifting the axle from one side to the other, trying to eyeball what looks straight. And so here I've jacked up the axle. I've got it on stands up high, and you can see it's aligned. It's pretty much in line from side to side. There's still some misalignment front and back, but I'll take care of that by putting on those U-bolts and starting to ratchet them down slowly, one at a time, working back and forth from both sides so that the pins and the holes start to align themselves with the help of the U-bolts. So here's a very close angle. I actually jacked it up a little bit higher here. And now we're almost ready to go to put the U-bolts in. You can see it's pretty much in line. It's just a question. This can be tricky. It's just a question of getting it home. And it took me a while, but eventually this may take you some trial and error, but eventually it'll get there. And then now is where I start bringing it home, where I start to actually, I'll use my electric until I get too close. I'll use my electric to start ratcheting down those nuts onto the U-bolts, one at a time, because it will shift forward and backward depending on which one you do. And all the time you're looking underneath to make sure that pin aligns with the hole. And here I am just checking my work as I go to make sure that in fact it is straight and going in the direction I need it to go. And then finally, after working carefully, I've got it home. Both sides are aligned. Both pins are in the holes they're supposed to go in. So my axle is all set. Now at this point, I am not torqued. This is actually a loose, semi-tight fit here because I still need the axle to be able to spin. I want the axle to be able to spin so that when I put the weight of the vehicle on it, then I can torque it down. Whoa. Hold on there. This is what you get when you have a mechanic mechanic in quotes, who's only worked on Hondas and independent suspension cars. And this is his first time working on something with solid axles and leaf springs. So that's wrong. No, go ahead and torque it down now. I believe with the rough country kit that I have, it's 55 foot-pounds. And then after 50 miles, they recommend coming back and retorquing it. So while the axle is hanging free, supported by the leaf springs and the shocks, torque it down to your torque specs at this point. Sorry about that. Made a mistake here. So go ahead and torque it down now. Put your wheels back on. You're almost done with this job. Now the wheels are back on. Hopefully you know how to put your wheels back on. I'm not going to go through that. The wheels are back on. She's jacked up on the hydraulic jack. The jack stands are all removed and out of the way. You definitely don't want to leave them near your car because when you lower this, you're going to lower it gently. But I've had it happen in the past where jack stands have scraped up the side of my car. And there she goes. She's back on 4 wheels. So that's it, right? I got lucky and everything worked out well in the end. I rode off into happiness. No, not quite. I don't get lucky. But one of the reasons I do these videos the way I do and show you my mistakes is that when you watch these other channels, Yeah, they give you, some of them give you a great idea of how it's done, but they don't show you the parts where, hey, here's how I messed up, you could mess up too. Most of them don't. So I wanted to, in this channel, this is part of what it is, man. I'm going to show you how I screw up. I am not a professional mechanic. I'm not really good at this. I am new to working on Jeeps and four-wheel drives. So these are the kinds of things that can happen. So what I did next was I went and measured the angles, right? Went to the drive shaft and measured the angle there multiple times, got the average, and it averaged out to just under 14 degrees, so I went with 14. Then I went back to the pinion angle, or the pinion, and measured off the back of the diff cover and the back of the differential itself where it becomes the axle. And again, I did multiple measurements, averaged them out, and got about 9 degrees. Took it back to the calculator at Tom Woods, and it looks like this is not going to be exact, because as you change angle, the drive shaft length changes, but it's close enough. And it looks like I'm at least 2 degrees too low. And that it's about what it looks like when I actually visually look at the drive shaft to pinion itself under the Jeep. So next step, go to Rocky Road. That means, 2 degrees too low means I need a 5-degree shim. That's kind of an odd number. The only place I found it was Rocky Road Outfitters, and I love those guys anyway. So went ahead and bought it from them. And it looks like now I'm going to have to do this job a 4th time, because when I did take it out for a test drive, grinding again in a different location, and less frequently under different circumstances. But when I look at my drive shaft, it's the extension, it's almost to its max in terms of its extension. So yeah, I'm going to have to do this job again. So learn from my mistakes. Only do this job once. Doc out. Oh, you made it to the end. That's awesome. Listen, I'm Doc. I'm the one who's, the voice behind these videos. And I really appreciate you taking the time to actually watch the whole thing. That's fantastic. If you've got time, if you want to, if you like the video, hit like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to hit the bell button so you get notified of new videos when I put them up. I'm going to try and do one a week. And I'm going to do a bunch of Instagram stuff, so make sure you follow me there and on Twitter. Instagram's going to be the shorter stuff. I don't have any merchandise yet. I'm planning to, as the channel grows. If I succeed, I'll get some merch. For now, if you really want to help me in another way, you like these videos enough, I'm going to put links to my books in the description of the video. I'm a science fiction author in my spare time as well, so I'm juggling a lot of balls. But anyway, I really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you at the next one. Hey, do me a favor and turn this junk off. I don't know how to deal with tech.